Awesome. And Callie, while you're getting that ready, just a reminder to everybody, make sure you sign in. It's timestamped, sign in and out. I put the link in the chat for you, so you're all set to go. Just let me know if you have any questions.
All right, and okay, you can see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so as we jump in today, we will be going through two different sessions. The first one is access and advancement for all with our boot camp, and we're just going to get sucked right into it and get going. We've got a lot of content to cover today and want to make sure that we have plenty of time for your discussion. So many of you shared a lot of really important thoughts, ideas, stories about how illustrative math has gone with your students in the past year. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to collaborate and continue to share around that too. So I see a few names that were not here with us on Friday, I believe. So just to introduce myself again, my name is Callie. I am a facilitator with Teaching Lab, and outside of Teaching Lab, I work with a math education nonprofit that focuses on global education development. I've taught a whole bunch of elementary grades and have worked as an instructional coach. And I changed up my fun fact for today. So previously I shared with you all that I currently live in Ecuador, and my fun fact is that I learned to speak Spanish as an adult. So in my life, pretty much the only time I speak English now is when I am on a call like this. And I am really proud of the fact that I learned to speak Spanish as an adult, because I used to think that only kids could really develop multilingualism or be able to become bilingual. And so I have been a living experiment and living proof that adults are capable of learning new things as complex as language. And we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit about some things that you have learned recently as well, or memories of learning something, but that's something that I think about a lot. And I even remember when I was first learning Spanish, I was in Costa Rica, and my friends would get frustrated with me when I wasn't able to communicate very effectively in Spanish, and they would switch and speak to me in English. A lot of them spoke English, and they didn't really have the patience to speak to me in Spanish. And after I spent a significant amount of time abroad, I came back to that community and was speaking with my friends in Spanish, and they said, "To tell you the truth, Callie, we thought you were never going to learn." And I did, and so I'm really proud of that. And we have a new face with us today from Teaching Lab, so I'm going to let Emily introduce herself to all of you.
Hi, and Callie, there's something a little funky going on with your screen, so maybe there's just like a spot that's grayed out. So maybe while I'm introducing myself, you can like reshare or something. But my name's Emily Howard. So excited to be here with y'all today. I work full-time with Teaching Lab as a content manager. So basically I design a lot of the PD, like the one that you are and have been experiencing over the last week. Before working with Teaching Lab, I was at another nonprofit supporting math teachers across K-12. And before that, I taught and coached at a school here in Memphis. That's better, Callie. Thank you. I have taught first, second, third, and fourth grade math. I actually looped with my students, which was really fun because you get to know your students really well, but it was also, as you can imagine, very challenging because it's basically starting from scratch in terms of content every year. But yeah, I love the math, the elementary math. This is my favorite content. So I'm super excited to be here with y'all. Fun fact, I think she's the world's neediest dog. And so you might hear a little whining because if I'm talking to you, she's going to be a little jealous, but hopefully she'll behave for us.
Thank you, Emily. Let's see. Okay, so now it's your turn. We'd love to hear from you. If you can also put your name, how you prefer to be addressed in the chat, that's helpful for us. And along with that, share with us a time that you mastered a new skill or concept. You can think about what helped you access that new learning and make progress. We'll give everyone a couple minutes to, or a few moments to drop that in. So looking for your thoughts in the chat, but of course, feel free to come off mute and share out if that works better for you. Okay, seeing some examples here from Sammy. Mastered baking French macaroons. Nice. The perfect ratios of ingredients. Lots of real world math applications there. Learning how to ski, definitely. Oh, seeing encouragement and tips needed. And to play the guitar. Nice. Okay, so some of these that I'm seeing are learning because of necessity and others are learning because of interest. Mhm. Mhm. Teaching conceptual learning, becoming a parent.
I admire
Definitely.
the people who fix the garage, the disposal. The garbage
yes.
disposal. That's so cool.
And watching a YouTube video, definitely. Emily, I'm kind of with you on there. You said you can barely make pasta. That's how I feel. My husband is the cook in our family. Thank you for sharing those. So let's keep those in mind as we're thinking about, really what made it so that we were able to access that learning and make progress. None of these seem like things that were just a quick, like, I got it on the first try. We had to take steps to be able to do something. And some of us are sharing about how we're still in the process of learning something new. Good things for us to keep in mind as we start to examine how to make learning accessible for our students. I'm understanding the stock market. That's one I'm still working on. All right, so in Module D for the first session today, which is session 7, and then we'll get to session 8, we will really be digging into this access and advancement for all. For your pre-work in Moodle, you had your session overview, you had a quick video about diverse learners, as well as a video and the page from the IM materials about mathematical language routines. So that's what we'll be digging into more as we go through this first part of our time together today. And my screen's not changing. There we go. A little bit of a delay there. Can someone come off mute and read our question for all of our boot camp today? What is our overview?
How can we provide equitable math instruction and build math proficiency for all students through the college and career readiness standards, the illustrative mathematics curriculum, and NCTM's effective mathematics teaching practices?
Thank you, Willie.
Anytime.
And just as a reminder, there are 4 modules in boot camp. So today we are really digging in with Module D, planning for student success. All right, and in this module, we have 3 learning targets. This first one in this session is to explore strategies that increase access and advancement for all. So what we really want to be thinking about is this question of how do I support my students with the IM materials? We know that IM was designed for an archetypical student, which might not be any of our students and is definitely not all of the students in our classroom. And so today we'll be examining some of the supports for diverse learners that are built into the curriculum and thinking about how you can leverage your knowledge and expertise as a professional to be able to meet the needs of your specific students. So we have our agreements that come from Teaching Lab. And I know on Friday you mentioned that considering differing perspectives was one that we were doing really well with as a group. If you could drop in the chat, think about one that you might want to center today. And this is always my reminder as well to turn my desktop notifications off so that I can minimize distractions. What might you want to center today as we work together? I see consider differing perspectives. What else? Be present and engage fully. Yes. Other minimize distractions. The teacher in me with minimize distractions decided that I needed a moody octopus. Have you guys seen these that like switch moods? And so mine is my note for people in my house when it's on happy, it means I'm in a meeting, but it's okay if you need to interrupt to ask me a question. And when it's on angry, it's I'm busy unless it's an emergency, please come back another time. That's one of my own ways to work on minimizing my distractions too. All right, and so we also looked quickly on Friday at this poster of community agreements from San Diego Enhanced Mathematics, and we pulled out some of the connections from what was on here to what we have been talking about as a community. And I want to give us a moment to do that again today. And so we'll just take a couple seconds to glance through this and call out. You can come off mute, you can drop in the chat if there are things that you're thinking about that are on this agreement poster that we've also been talking about that help us kind of bring together our learning with what the mathematics community in San Diego is committing to. Right, so what connections do you see here? I'm really seeing a connection between the equity-based practices of affirming students' identities and the how we feel part of the community agreements, definitely. What else? So some of the things that you can be thinking about today as we go through are also when we do math, we talk. So students engage in meaningful mathematical discourse every day. We shared some strategies on Friday and heard from a lot of you about what math discourse has sounded like in your classrooms. We're going to dig into that some more today. So that's one to keep in mind. And we also talked about how this we acknowledge piece really connects well to our commitment as a community of language of commitment and personal responsibility. So as we come back to this slide, want to remind all of us that during this and all of our sessions together, we're going to do our best to use language of commitment and personal responsibility. So if you or I hear each other drifting into language of complaint and blame, our charge is to hold each other accountable to using this language instead of commitment and personal responsibility, recognizing that when we hold each other accountable in this way, we are really digging into the work of transforming our classrooms into equitable spaces for all of our students. All right, so for our warm up into our conversation about access for all, here's 2 images that we're going to observe. So on your own, take a few seconds to compare and contrast these 2 images and chat what you notice. When you're ready, go ahead and drop in the chat. What do you notice here? So Jamie says, I'd be scared to use the ramps in the second picture. I agree. Oh, Melanie, this is interesting. Intentional access and make do access. Do you want to speak a little bit more to what you mean by that?
What I see here is this school here, or this place that has a place for the student to walk, they intentionally wanted to be inclusive. They built it into the building so that these kids or people could have access comfortably, you know, in any way. The one on the right makes me think of, oh, we just have to do it. Let those people who have those problems, you know, see if they make it, not worried about how safe it is. Who else can actually use that kind of ramp? You know, it looks like an afterthought.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that reflection. And that, like, who else could use it? That question that you asked really stuck out to me. And I saw a lot of head nods from the cameras that are on during that. While you were saying that as well, it seems like that really resonates with us. Yep, Susie says second picture wouldn't be accessible for all. Definitely.
No.
And we are seeing both pictures have a tool to help with walking, but when we're digging in, we're really able to see a difference in those tools. So the image on the left here exemplifies the idea of universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is a way of thinking about teaching and learning that gives all students equal opportunity to learn because supports are embedded in the curriculum and instruction. So this is something that we do have as a benefit through our IM materials, and we're going to be looking at this more today. So before we look at what this looks like in math and with IM in particular, I want to connect this idea back to the opportunity gap that you discussed when you were in session 4 on equity and identity. So we know, and the San Diego community agreements also recognize that gaps exist and that gaps in achievement can be attributed to gaps in opportunity. So when we say access for all, we're talking about creating opportunities. Specifically, there are 4 things that students need. They need to work on grade appropriate assignments. They need to do most of the thinking in their lessons. They need deep engagement. And students need teachers who hold high expectations for every single one of them. So diverse learners are students who are often denied access to those resources like grade level work and deep thinking. And today we'll be answering the question, how do I support my diverse learners using effective strategies like instructional routines, mathematical language routines, and accelerating learning to promote access to grade level learning?
Allie,
Yes.
this is Rhonda. Can you go back to the slide before so I can take a screenshot? The one before that. The one before that.
This one?
That one. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure. You're welcome.
Got it.
All right.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
I understand we should have access to all grade level learning. However, like with a student with an IEP, like in the past, I would just like take the same assignment. Instead of doing, what 18 times 3 is, I might have them do like what 5 times 3 is. Like, in your opinion, what's the best way to, it's just challenging when you have kids with IEPs, like you want to challenge them and push them to go further. But that's where it gets tricky for me. Can you explain how you would do that?
Mhm. Sure, but before I dive in, I'd like to open that question up to the group and see like what do we think? Everyone else who's in the room here, what is your best idea for moving forward when that's true?
I think, in hearing and listening to what, I don't know what her name was. Who was it just sharing?
Josie.
Josie. I think that as a teacher, so we have to look at ourselves as part of a village. And so in doing that, I think it should still be challenged with the grade level, and then working closely with support and their ed specialist. So the ed specialist can create more ways and support for them to get there. So I think we should adjust, but also make sure it's still rigorous and the goal is still there, but just putting supports in from the village, you, the teacher, or us, the teacher, the ed specialist, and other support people, and having that conversation of how each of us can be a part and making sure that the student reaches that goal.
Okay, thank you. Because sometimes I feel like I scaffold their learning a little too much. Like I want to give them tools, but I don't know if I'm allowing enough space for them to do the cognitive thinking, like if I'm giving them too many tools. You know what I mean? That's where I kind of get a little tricked up in when it comes to problem solving. Like I want to access all these different tools for them, but I'm like, gosh, am I overdoing it and scaffolding a little too much? So I guess, you have to see how it goes year to year.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Josie, and thank you for bringing it to our group as well. And I think that it's one that we can continue to consider as we go about the conversations that we're going to have over the next hour or so. And thinking about so yes, students have their IEP goals, and there are ways that we can provide scaffolds into grade level material for them. And so some of the strategies, some of the routines that we're going to talk about and dig into demonstrate what that might look like. So kind of recognizing though that I think you're onto something and what you're paying attention to, and wondering, am I scaffolding too much? So I encourage you to keep thinking about that. And even as we get into our breakout rooms a little bit later to start talking about what might this look like for a specific lesson, that's a good thing to bring to the group too. How could I provide access to all of my students, including those with IEPs, to this grade level content using the resources that are available? Okay, so as we start with exploring more about how instructional routines specifically can support diverse learners, remember that these routines are built into the IM materials, and we've seen them before. We talked a lot about them on Friday, and we talked about how they give structure to time and interactions that allow students to spend their cognitive energy on the task itself and to deeply understanding the math rather than struggling to understand the directions. They invite all students to engage and contribute in the mathematical conversations. We experienced a few of them together. We dug into number talks, and several of you shared about some of the other routines that have been really effective in your classrooms. And now we're going to dive into a few more of them to think specifically about how can they support diverse learners and build equity in our classrooms. Let's see. So, Hold on, I don't think my sound is going to share here. So we're gonna watch a quick video on Notice and Wonder. I'm gonna stop sharing so that Emily can share and make sure that the sound is right. With this, not yesterday, Friday, we talked a lot about Notice and Wonder, but there's something in this video that I think also speaks to, Josie, some of what you were wondering. So as we watch this, really want to be thinking about, how does Notice and Wonder build equity in the classroom? And if Notice and Wonder is new for us, then we can be thinking of it from and how might I begin to incorporate this? But for those of us who have been using IM, I know that most of you piloted the curriculum last year, be thinking about, have you seen this play out with your own students? And is there something that you can do to highlight equity and access even more when you teach with Notice and Wonder?
Take a look at your graph.
In most classes, variability is the norm, not the exception.
We're going to be doing an I notice, I wonder.
This teacher is aware that these children learn at different paces. And so she is creating a mechanism to see the developmental starting points of a diverse group of kids so that children can move at different rates to master the content.
This classroom is heterogeneously grouped. This is a non-tracked class. Some kids will be bypassing Algebra 1 next year and going into an advanced class, and some kids will be taking a pre-algebra class. So there's a wide range. Today's graph had a lot of information in it, and so it was perfect for an I notice, I wonder.
What is this graph telling us? What do you notice in the graph? Don't do the wonders yet, just your notices. Take about 2 minutes.
The I notice, I wonder helps kids slow down and really focus on what's in front of them. They wrote about what they noticed and then turned and talked to a neighbor to enhance and to draw attention to things that they maybe had missed.
Renewable energy aren't being used as much.
Yeah, seems to be going down actually.
The information she is getting is about the individual variability in that classroom. What the kids are getting is the benefit of learning from each other.
All right, let's get a list of I notice and I wonder.
I noticed that petroleum had a big jump in the 1900s.
It's another notice.
I noticed this is the monthly energy review.
Oh, so you're looking below the graph as well as above the graph. Awesome. All right, let's switch over to the back side, and I want your wonders. What do I wonder about this graph?
The I wonder is a great way for me to see what they need to know.
So what do you wonder? Oh my gosh, so much to wonder about.
I wonder what the other renewables are.
It's also a time when you can build confidence in kids.
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Aiden,
What is BTU?
what is a BTU? Great question.
I notice, I wonder just brings the conversation to a place where all people can contribute. It gives everyone a voice. It allows kids to listen to other people's ideas before they do the analysis. So it's like a way to collect information collaboratively, but allowing time to think first.
Thank you for that, Emily. So would love to hear from someone who's been using this routine and how you've seen it play out in your own classroom to build equity and provide an entry point for all of your students. Who could share with us?
I like this routine. I teach third grade and I like it because it's something that any student can do. They can all notice something, you know, whether it's numbers or if it's a picture or if it's a title, everyone can notice something. And then when we do the wonder part, you know, I get a lot of kids that have wonders as well. So I feel like it's an all-inclusive warm-up.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I
let's see.
noticed, oh,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say in my class, especially when I was teaching summer school with a very small group,
But even during the regular school year, I noticed that students that I don't really usually hear their voices, they have a lot to say about what they notice. And it's great because it kind of gives me, as a facilitator of this conversation that they're going to be having, like an entry point as to who I can kind of, or how I can like drive the conversation and move it around the room, while still hearing multiple voices within the classroom. And so I really like that. It just gives me kind of like a little opening into their minds to begin the day.
Thank you. And I'm seeing in the chat too, noticing having all voices be heard, students having the opportunity to listen to another perspective. Definitely. Let me go back to sharing and let me know if it's sharing correctly or if there's a box. Again, am I good? Thumbs up, anyone, if you can see? Yes, thank you. All right. Awesome. And so there's a ton of instructional routines that are a part of the IM curriculum, and we have talked a lot about these. What we want to do now, Emily's going to drop the 5 equity-based math teaching practices into the chat so that we can refresh our own memory. But want to take just a few seconds to connect the routines to these equity-based practices. So if there's a routine that you've done with your students and you say like, this routine brought about affirming mathematical learners' identities in my classroom, and just make it really clear for us where you see the overlap between instructional routines and these equity-based practices. So Lindsay says, opening with broad questions, it clears the air, making students feel comfortable speaking during math. Right. And which equity-based practice, Lindsay, do you see that tying to, or which of the practices?
Sorry, I'm trying to hit unmute here. Hi, how are you? I think that which of the equity practices, just making students feel comfortable to have their voice heard in math class, opening up with something broad. I think that it was Josie that was saying they all will have something to say. And then I found in my class that it makes them feel more comfortable sharing when we get to the tougher problems later on in the lesson, or more comfortable having an idea.
So I hear that it's building their concept of their own identity as a math learner. Like, I have mathematical thoughts and I have valuable contributions to a mathematics discussion. And so it's able to also build on drawing on multiple resources of knowledge in the same way. Cool. Is anyone a kindergarten teacher who has used questions about us? I haven't heard anyone mention kindergarten, but wanted to make sure there's not somebody who I just haven't seen who's there. I also have heard a lot about how questions about us for kindergarten in particular does a lot to affirm students' learner identities, because it explicitly includes their experiences and knowledge in math instruction.
Kelly, can I just say that Sandy Davison is here from Baker. She has been at all of the trainings. She texted me a while ago saying that you guys can't hear her when she unmutes herself. I asked her to restart her computer because sometimes my computer microphone stops working if I haven't restarted in a while. But if that's the case, I would just like to say to Sandy, please participate by writing in the chat if your computer is not allowing you to participate. But I know that she wants to speak up, but she was having some difficulty. So just an FYI, Sandy Davison is a kindergarten teacher from Baker who's participating. Thank you.
Great. Yes, thank you, Kathleen, for bringing that to the group. And definitely, Sandy, if we can't hear you in the chat, please, we would love to be able to read a little bit more about your experience. All right, let's see, we've got which one doesn't? Here's some comments in the chat. I'm going to try to keep up with what's here. Yeah, some good connections. Which one doesn't belong? We talked about on Friday as well. Awesome. So, and do want to remember, you know, at the end of our time together on Friday, also, we talked about how even effective teaching practices and the routines, the way that they overlap with the effective teaching practices, it's true for them too. But the routines themselves don't inherently provide equity. A lot of it has to do with how we implement them. So when we are doing which one doesn't belong, who gets to share their thinking and justify their solution? You know, we have to consider whose voices are being amplified and celebrated in those moments. And it sounds like, you know, from what a lot of you are writing in the chat and are sharing out loud, it's an opportunity. You're providing an opportunity for those learners who you might not hear from as much. And so that's the way that we definitely want to be thinking about this. Not only how do the structures of the routines support equity in my classroom, but also how am I implementing them in a way to make them even more equitable for all of my learners. So we've been talking about the instructional routines at this point, like Notice and Wonder, Number Talks, and how these provide the opportunities and structures for academic content and to engage in mathematical conversations. I'm thinking about that. We talk about math, students talk about math every day. The math language routines, another type of routine in IM, are meant to support students in developing language alongside their math learning and also ensure that all students are able to participate. So today we will start examining the 8 math language routines and consider how these routines will support us in implementing the equity-based math teaching practices and supporting our diverse learners as well. We won't, for the sake of time, be able to dive into all of the routines, but after this session, there will be additional resources on Moodle. And at the end, I can show you how you can access them so that you can dive into these more, including videos of teachers implementing some of the routines, if that is something that you'd like to see examples of what they're looking like in other classrooms. So equitable and effective instruction intentionally incorporates support for language development, particularly for English learners. We've experienced some of these supports during our time together. We've used some like the first math language routine, Stronger and Clearer Each Time. And the math language routine support align with the following design principles, which you read about some as well in your pre-work article. Would love to hear from several of you in the chat or to come off mute a little bit, some of your key takeaways from that article or from what you've seen in your classroom, you know, in reading about these. If they're not new to most of you, you know, how are you seeing this be true when you were using IM with your students? We've talked a lot about the instructional routines. What about the mathematical language routines? Or where are we as a group with these? Okay, Sandy's talking about giving time to communicate in Spanish before trying in English, definitely. Let's see. Lindsay, I'm going to check here. Yes, the article that you shared is the one that I'm referencing, and I'm going to recopy that into the chat in case anyone else has the same question. Okay. Let's see, but I don't know if everyone can see the link that you shared. Let me see. There you go. Thank you. Mhm.
I think something like 3 reads, I mean, absolutely is crucial to support sense making. If we want to make a connection between one of those, I think with my students, just the act of slowing down and taking the question away and making sense of the context of the problem, like that changed so much in my classroom to support even if you weren't a language learner, just kids just automatically want to try smashing numbers together without making sense of what the problem is. So that's been one of my favorite MLRs that I like to use in the classroom.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's one actually that we are going to talk about some. So that was exactly the math language routine that we want to highlight. And I remember somebody mentioned that it's their favorite, one of their favorite components of the IM curricula as well on Friday, and just talking about how powerful it's been for learners. So Ray, can you share with us a little bit maybe about how, like when you work through 3 reads with your students, what is that like? Can you tell us more? Like, how do you get started?
Did you ask me to share?
If you can, if you would like, or anyone else can as well, but just since you were talking about how that one was one that you really enjoy.
I just think it helps slow everybody down to not like have them jump to try to start computing something or solving something first. I always like to take, I mean, we have endless amounts of word problems, and that's always a challenge for students. So it's just been useful for me. I've been working with 3 reads for a long time, but taking away the prompt and asking, you know, what is happening in this story. I think even just that move, which you can do with any curriculum that you're using, but it's so beautiful that it's built into IM, I think is such a great tool, because you can't just jump to make calculations. So that's how I usually start, is by what's happening in this story, what's happening in this problem. And I'm not sure what this picture is right here, but.
Oh yes, yes, I don't have the first part of the text up yet. Definitely. So
can I share how I was taught to do it?
Sure.
Or just I'm interested to see if people do it other ways. I'll usually post an image of something about the word problem. For example, if it was about swimming laps, I'll put a picture of a pool, and then I'll just read the problem out loud to the class a few times with no text on the board. Just, you know, Callie swam 14 laps in the month of May for every day, and then 15 laps every day in June. And then I don't pose the question yet. I just give them the information and the problem. And it's still just the image on the board. And then I ask them to tell me what numbers are in the problem. So the first thing they have to do is identify the numbers in the problem. And then they'll tell me, oh, 14 laps and 15 laps. And then I'll ask them, what question do you think they're going to ask you? So they come up with the question on their own, and they'll all write it on their whiteboards or whatever it is. And then it also helps them like think about, you know, how many is language that they learn how to use, like how many laps did she swim in all, or whatever they come up with. And then I put the text on the board and the question, and we kind of break it down like that. I don't know if people do it other ways, but.
Does anyone want to speak to if that's similar to how they do it, or if they have a variation?
I don't know if it would be considered a 3 reads method, but one of the tools that we've been working with our kids with, just to slow them down, especially when it comes to solving word problems and to get them to think, is we do a word problem chart. So in the word problem chart, they are presented with a problem, and the problem is always visual for them to read it. And then they have to select what's being counted and what's the value of what's being counted. So if it's like 5 ducks and 3 frogs are sitting in the pond? How many animals are there all together? They have to identify that we're talking about frogs and ducks and what's the quantity of each of those. And then they have to do a visual representation to solve the problem before they move on to the algorithm. And then usually at the end, they usually have to write a small summary about what was their thinking as they were going through. It helps them to slow down and it helps them to think as they're solving problems, because often students will just pull out the numbers and the keywords and shoot.
Definitely. And Ray just shared the flow that she's typically using in the chat with us too, thinking about how to go through those 3 reads and slow down, similarly to how Willie was just describing. So here on the slide is an example of a grade 2 unit 2 activity, where this is Mancala, which is a game that was created in Africa, but it's played all over the world, where players try to capture seeds from each other as they go. And so to start out this lesson, students are noticing and wondering what they see about this game, and then learning a little bit about it. And then they go into their 3 reads activity. So here you have the first part of the text, just like we were hearing you talk about, that doesn't have the questions yet. And so through the first read, they're thinking about, what is this story about? What's the context? What's happening here? Then in the second read, thinking about what are the different things that we can count, and pulling out different students thinking about what are the things that we can count here. And then we'll look at the question. And so as students are working on the question, you can also put up different representations. Here's an example. I'm gonna just click and open it really quickly. So you could have students say, which one of these representations accurately represents or is accurate for the problem that we're looking at, and have a discussion about, which representation and why. And then going back to here. And then we have as well, this is very similar to what Ray just shared, kind of the prompts for what the 3 reads can be. Something to note is that common tricks that teachers have often used with their students for word problems are teaching them strategies like cubes or smile. If any of you are familiar with those, where it's like, I remember that C means this, and so I do this. And it's a very procedural way to go through word problems. But when we do that, we're actually taking away students' opportunities to reason and problem solve, which we know is a key piece of building their mathematical proficiency. But, Solana, thank you for that clarification. So we can leverage this protocol of the 3 reads to encourage the reasoning, just like all of you are saying, to slow down and access, what's happening in this word problem. It's not just a kind of plug and chug. What are the numbers? Let me just pick an operation and see if I get it. If one of the answers is in the multiple choice options, I know that's what my students would often do. I want to just take a second to check on the chat, because a bunch of messages came through, and make sure I'm not missing anything. And also, Emily, if you see anything that is scrolling by while I'm talking, otherwise feel free to jump out and share.
Only thing I was going to ask, Josie asked about these slides. I believe yep. Okay. Yep. So Sarah answered that question. Never mind.
Okay. Great. Okay, so let's connect what we know about the math language routines to these equity-based practices, specifically one that we have not spotlighted yet. So drawing on multiple resources of knowledge. This means that we're recognizing students' strengths, knowledges, and experiences. These can be mathematical strengths and experiences, and we also, we definitely want to include students' previous learning in math to support their new understanding, but we also want to draw on other resources of knowledge like culture, community, family, history. And so this practice of drawing on multiple resources of knowledge emphasizes the importance of honoring multiple language forms by connecting everyday language to math language and supporting multilingualism in our classrooms. So here's 4 of what this looks like, can you think of some non-examples? What would this not look like in classrooms? And you can either share your thinking in the chat or by unmuting. Yes, I can repeat the question. So here we see some examples of what drawing on multiple resources of knowledge looks like in the classroom. What would be some examples of what it does not look like? Some non-examples of drawing multiple resources of knowledge. What do we not want to do?
Simply have them follow a formula.
Yep, and I see like picking out just key words, not reinforcing vocabulary. For strategies, avoiding discussion. Here we have some non-examples too. And so we can connect, like when we force students to do things our way, then we're treating the knowledge that they bring as irrelevant. You know, we're saying, I'm the holder of knowledge, you must do things my way, rather than allowing them to build on what they know. Not allowing time to talk. And I saw somebody mentioned earlier the importance of students having the opportunity to express their thinking in whatever language they feel most comfortable with before asking them to share in English, and really want to highlight that too, the importance of supporting and affirming multilingualism. Let's see, here's a non-example about correcting students' language. Yeah, and thinking about math language and recognizing, you know, that I connect this back also to math learners' identities. Like, we're all mathematical. So math is not just something that is held in a box of privilege for a few, but it's something that we all use. We're all users and doers of math every day in our lives. And I also recognize that the education context in California, up until really recently, did not celebrate multilingualism. I know my master's is actually in bilingual education, and we looked at Proposition 227 as an example of a really harmful recent attack on quality education access for emergent bilingual students, when, you know, many of you are probably even more familiar with it than I am for teaching in the state of California, but just, you know, this like English only approach that was law, not only in California, but also in Texas and so many other places around the United States up until like 2016, 2017, and which actually goes against everything that research knows to be true. You know, that when students have the opportunity to develop proficiency in their first language, they're developing their critical thinking skills, and they're becoming more proficient at grade level and gaining advanced proficiency in English when we support that native language, the acquisition and development as well. Yep, Danielle saying thank goodness for the California framework and ELD standards that have been put out since then, definitely. And I love to see the community agreements that we looked at the beginning that came from the state of California too, and seeing, just calling out that that you are actively working to make things different, to make things equitable for all of your learners and those who have historically been marginalized in the education system. Okay, so given what you know now, how can math language routines help you to implement this practice of drawing on multiple resources of knowledge in your classroom? We'll drop that question in the chat as well. So thinking about this equitable teaching practice, how do the math language routines help us implement this with our students? So Elizabeth is saying affirms and recognizes culture and familial math language. Yep. And then going back up to something Danielle said that was talking about the teaching of math language, and want to highlight that we can help students connect the language that they use at home with math language, and recognize, you know, that they are bringing in a foundation that they can continue to build from. They don't have to learn something totally new. Yes, those problem and data cards, the info gap, that is one of my favorite things about the IM curriculum. We're having to communicate with each other, yeah. Honoring knowledge they come with and building on that expertise. So Lana, that's okay. The notice and wonder, but it's still building the conversation and giving students, you know, there's ways that we can bring aspects of that routine into this conversation as well, for sure, and draw on multiple resources of knowledge. I'm going to skip this for time at the moment. But so as you've seen, there are a lot of supports built into the curriculum for us already, which is really great because we're working on this goal today to answer the question, how do I support my students with the illustrative math materials? So a part of answering that question is considering how to support our students who come to us with what is commonly referred to as unfinished learning. So as you all are very much aware, the last 2 school years have presented us with challenges like we've never seen before. So this year, as students get ready to walk into our rooms, we have to figure out how do we support them in learning the current grade level content when we know they might not have finished the entire curriculum from the years prior. You might notice that the term unfinished learning is in contradiction to our language of personal commitment and responsibility, because it sounds as though the students are responsible for not having learned the content, when in reality, their unfinished learning is a result of unfinished teaching and all of the circumstances of the past 2 years that were also out of much of our control. So in this section, we want to ensure we're focusing on addressing unfinished instruction. So that's the term that I want to try to use as we think about how to accelerate. So in order to understand how best to address unfinished instruction, we're going to examine some findings from a report compiled by TNCP and Zern. So Zern, I don't know if you're familiar with Zern. It's also a high quality instructional material. And so Zern and TP collaboratively analyzed data to determine whether remediation or acceleration was an appropriate approach to address this unfinished instruction. So when we talk about remediation, what we mean by this is significant time spent below grade level before moving on to new learning. This is a very logical step to take that makes a lot of sense. But what the report shows us actually is that acceleration is much more effective. So when we say acceleration, we mean connecting this unfinished instruction into the context of new learning. So we're going to look at some examples from this report. So Zern, the curriculum referenced in this study, tracks when students are struggling through digital progress monitoring. So researchers were actually able to see how often students struggled in classes that provided remediation and classes that provided learning acceleration. And when we say struggle here, Zern it's an online platform. And so when students are working independently and they are like not being successful with a task, then they get a boost, which is like supportive videos or hints and tips. And so beyond that, if they continue to be unsuccessful with the task, then it generates a report for their teacher so that their teacher is able to do something about it or support them, provide some support in another way. So when we say struggle here, we want to recognize that that's different from the productive struggle that we were discussing as a positive thing for our students on Friday. This is a struggle as like, okay, I'm stuck. I'm unable to progress further. And that's not the struggle that we want our students to be in. So the first finding that this report shares is that when classes received learning acceleration rather than remediation, the students struggled less. They got less stuck. They also made it further into the curriculum. So if we want our students to struggle less with grade level content and we want to ensure that they make it as far as we can in the curriculum, we should accelerate for learning rather than remediate. And what some of this was too is, so they're looking at, what independent work did teachers assign to students? Did they assign them grade level independent work or work that went back so that they were spending time below grade level? As this graph shows, Black and Latinx students, as well as students in high poverty schools, were more likely to experience remediation than white students and those in lower poverty schools, even though they had identical success on early grade level content. Students in high poverty schools were nearly twice as likely to be remediated as students in low poverty schools and in schools with mostly students of color. Nearly 1 in 6 students were remediated regardless of their success on grade level content earlier in the year. In other words, faced with similar data on grade level mastery, teachers were less likely to believe students of color and those from low-income families were ready to engage with grade level work. They were assigning students work that was below their grade level. So this ties directly back to what we learned from the opportunity myth, that students of color are provided with less access to grade level content, and teachers often demonstrate and less access to teachers with high expectations. But here is the good news. Learning acceleration was really effective for students of color and for students who were experiencing low incomes. You can see that learning acceleration here led to 27% more lessons completed across all classrooms in the first graph here. But when looking specifically at classrooms with the majority of students of color, learning acceleration led to almost 50% more lessons completed. It also led to fewer struggles. This is really great news for us as we're prioritizing equity and starting to plan on how to accelerate learning for our students. And I do want to take a moment to circle back to remember that remediation is something that is logical. Oftentimes we talk about like the importance of meeting students where they are, but what we need to make sure that we're doing is not cutting their opportunities to access rigorous work at a high level. It reminds me a lot of one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou, which she says, do the best you can with what you know. And then when you know better, do better. And I know that quote reminds me a lot to like have grace with myself, but also to remind myself, like, keep learning, do the best you can, but keep learning. And then once you know better, do better. So I know that I've definitely used remediation with my students when I should have been working on accelerated learning in the past. But now that I know better, I can do better. So you might be thinking, that's a lot of information. I get it, but what does that actually mean? How do I do this? I am willing to bet that you probably have some insights from how, especially from the conversations we've had so far. I've heard you talk about a lot of things that are steps towards accelerating learning. So based on what you already know about IM2, what might be some ways to accelerate learning rather than remediate using the materials that you have? So I'll give a second for us to have some think time, drop your ideas in the chat, come off mute. And we can, oh yeah, great. Thank you, Emily, for dropping that question in the chat too. So with what you already know about IM, how might you be able to accelerate learning rather than remediate using your materials? Sarah says, do not alter the cognitive demand of the tasks. Let students ponder grade level tasks. Yes, that cognitive demand piece is so important, because that's where even the highest quality instructional materials, the rigor can be completely taken away by a well-meaning teacher who provides all of the steps needed to solve a problem. Mhm. Mhm. Multiple ways. Yep. Pre-unit practice problems. Yep, everyone grade level challenges, regardless of my perception of their learning. Mhm. I love this, Solana. Lift and connect student thinking. Rather than going from student to fix their thinking, let them share, hear from their peers, make connections. This is where real understanding comes from. Mhm. Yes, lots of great ideas coming. So really, in order to accelerate learning, there's 3 things that we're going to be doing. Studying the math of the unit or lessons that we're teaching, understanding the connections to previously addressed standards, and also knowing what will be a, hold on, I got tongue-tied. All right, so studying the math, understanding the connections to previously addressed standards that will be relevant for accelerating learning, and then making strategic decisions based on the data. So what are students saying during Notice and Wonder? That's data for me to be able to make my strategic decisions, to decide how to provide access to the grade level content for my students. So these 3 steps are actually part of the unit and lesson internalization that you do. So when you did your unit internalization along with the asynchronous session 6, you dove into the standards, the unit narrative, and the assessments to be able to study the math. You also understood connections of the standards and how your first unit is connected to previous content. So you've already done the first 2 parts of this process. And then as we move into session 8, you will be internalizing a lesson, and maybe you had an opportunity to dive into some of that pre-work during your async time this morning. But so as you're internalizing the lesson itself, you'll be able to make strategic decisions within that protocol. And we're going to have some time to practice that together today. And we're going to start this right now by sharing what we've already worked on in our async time with our grade level peers from that unit internalization. So for the sake of time, we'll focus on just one standard from the unit to start. So in breakout rooms now, your job is going to be to pick a standard from your first unit and discuss what you studied about the math of that standard and its connections to the standard. Emily just put some activity slides into the chat. You can open that and they'll be editable for you to add your notes to. So when you open it, you'll see a table of content. I have it right here, and you can go to your grade level. And then once you go, so if I click on second grade, I can see here that there's an opportunity for me to share the standard, to share my thoughts about the math, and then the connections to previous grade level work. So you'll be doing just the first 3 standards with your group. And then there's also an example at the end of the deck if you would like to see that. So going to give you a minute to open up the rooms and see if you have any questions. Oh yes, 3 slides. Thank you, Emily. And you'll have about 6 minutes.
And the rooms are ready to go. It'll be the self-select, y'all, by grade level. So hopefully it'll pop up for you when I open them here in just a second. But any questions before we jump into breakouts? Okay, I'm going to open the rooms.
Were we supposed to come back that quick?
Yes, sorry. We know that was not a lot of time. You'll get to go back to your group in just a moment.
I'm like, we got the standard.
Got the
about
standard.
it.
So I was like, oh.
We were still deciding on the standard.
Well, we
Okay.
actually settled on one and typed it in and was like, oh, they're closing.
Yes, I know that was fast. So what we are getting ready to do is go back into those rooms, but we're gonna open it up for you to go on to the next slide too. If you need to keep going with the math and the standard, of course, that's fine. But to open it up to being able to get into that make strategic decisions part 2. So this is the last part of the process of accelerating learning. You'll want to use the data from the second step. So when you're thinking about the connections, what are the connections to previous work? What do my students need to be able to access the standard? That's really where your teacher professional knowledge and expertise comes in. So usually this happens when you're working on internalizing a lesson before you go to teach it. So in our next session later this afternoon, you're going to have a little bit of time to do some planning and practice as well, building off of this work that you're doing right now. So we'll keep going as we continue through our total of 3 hours together. But so we'll give you about 5 more minutes in your group. Recognize that it's short. So if you're not able to dig in to a deep depth, we understand that. But it's more so having the opportunity to try it out and get an overview of what this looks like, but together with colleagues. So we're going to open the rooms for 5 more minutes, and then you will be able to take some notes here as well and then make instructional decisions. There's some prompts on the slide that can help you. You could be thinking about manipulatives, models, representations from previous grades that might provide a support. You know, is there an instructional routine, a math language routine that you want to add to provide an additional leverage to provide access to an activity or to content? Any questions before we go back to the groups?
Want us to skip other ones and just go straight to this one, or also do the other ones?
So it's important to have the math and connections piece to be able to make these decisions. But if you don't have time to go through and do one of the assessment problems together, for example, you know, that's okay, but take a look at it and to be able to answer those questions of like, what are the concepts and skills that my students will need that came from previous content? And then how can I make a decision to provide access to that? Kind of thinking about like just in time supports rather than a unit 0 of remediation. So just recognizing enough of the previous ones to have those connections in math to be able to plan, make a decision about what you might do.
And then maybe I'm on the wrong slides, but is the make instructional decisions, is that the same as make strategic decisions?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, one of our content probably just got changed and the other one didn't get edited. Thank you for that, though. We'll fix it.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll open them back up.
Okay.
I know that's really fast. Well, let me get back to my screen share again. Okay, so we know that that was not enough time for you to really get into the planning process. It might have only felt like enough time to take a deep breath and say, what are we doing? Do we have everything clear? But that's okay. What we hope is that you'll be able to begin to understand, like, what does this process look like to use my lesson internalization to plan to accelerate learning? And we also encourage you to continue this work in your grade level teams. And then as you gather more information about your students as they're in your classroom and you're learning about where they are, you'll be able to use that to think about how to support them to access your first unit. So as we get ready to wrap up this first part of our time together today, I have a quote here. If someone would be willing to come off mute and read it for us.
All students, in light of their humanity, their personal experiences, backgrounds, histories, languages, physical and emotional well-being, must have the opportunity and support to learn rich mathematics that fosters meaning-making, empowers decision-making, and critiques challenges and transforms inequities and injustices. Equity does not mean that every student should receive identical instruction. Instead, Equity demands that responsive accommodations be made as needed to promote equitable access, attainment, and advancement in mathematics education for each student.
Thank you, Sharice. So as we reflect on our practice and this last hour and a half of time together, in the chat box, I want to invite you to drop in how you would fill in this blank. So in the past, I've supported diverse learners by, going forward, I will. Thank you for these reflections. All right, if you're still typing that, keep them coming. You can keep sending them. And now it is time for us to take a break. You have had your brains on fire. I feel like with us, we have just like run through so much content over the last 90 minutes. And so we're going to take 10 minutes to pause. All right. So we have this double header today of two sessions, session 7 and session 8. So with session 7, we were really digging into how instructional routines, math language routines, and accelerating learning can support us to provide equitable instruction and access for all of our students. Now we are going to be diving into some planning and some intentional practice. So throughout this part of the session, we'll be digging into learning goals, internalizing the lesson, and then actually having time to practice digging in with our colleagues. So we are moving to the second 2 learning targets for this module, which is explain how strong mathematical learning goals support equitable instruction and student learning, and identify ways to prepare for equitable instruction. So we're about to dig into how to establish mathematical goals to focus learning. And notice how this is at the top of the effective teaching practices. We looked at this representation of these 8 teaching practices on Friday. So as we dig in here, you're going to be trying to answer this question that Emily just dropped in the chat. How do learning goals set the stage for equitable and effective instruction? So you don't have to answer that right now, but be thinking about it as in reference as we go through the next couple of slides. So here is a sample of a learning goal for 5th grade students. Students will be able to add fractions with unlike denominators. How many of us have written learning goals like this before in this form of students will be able to? You can either say like me, a reaction. I know I have. So students will be able to, and then we have either an action or a procedure. I see yes, I see me's, I see thumbs up. Yeah, these are very common for us. This is a really common way to write learning goals using the form of behavior outcomes. What is it that we want students to be able to do? What we are going to consider as an alternative right now are learning goals that describe an internal change in a student. So we're going to take a closer look at an example. So goal A is one way that you could rewrite the learning goal above. Take a moment to read goal A and then let me know what you noticed about the goal in the chat. Yeah, so we see a series of steps, the process with no specific strategies. Okay, so just like you noticed, this goal is all about a new procedure for a new type of problem. Students will know what to do, but not necessarily why. They may know that may know that you have to have a common denominator, but not the reason why that's needed. So now we're going to look at goal B, and after you finish reading it, tell me what you notice again in the chat. Definitely. So I'm seeing here deeper understanding of fraction. The know versus the understand. So yes, here there's a connection to the equity-based practices the practice that we just talked about, drawing on multiple resources of knowledge. So we're using students' previous knowledge as a bridge to understand new content. As you guess, lessons that are designed with one of these goals in mind could look pretty different. So what do you think a lesson designed for goal A might look like compared to a lesson for goal B? You can drop your thinking in the chat, or we'd love to hear some of your voices off of mute also. Yes, I will repeat the question. How could you imagine that a lesson tailored to goal A might be different from a lesson tailored to goal B? And Nate says the first is very procedural. The teacher would have to teach how to do each step. Okay. Willie, can you tell us more what you mean by the lessons can actually be the same?
So the lessons can actually be identical when in written format, but it's going to be based off we've been talking a lot about internalizing the lesson and really understanding. I think that's where the work needs to be done on the part of the teacher to make sure that they're delivering the lesson in such a way that's going to meet the students' needs. Yeah, that's as far as I'm going to go right now.
Okay, so what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that on paper the lessons might look the same, but the way that the teacher is delivering it might look different based on if it's with what the students need versus just what's on paper.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I see in the chat some thinking about, yes, especially with IM, the lesson plans are there for us. So now what are we going to do with that to turn it into something that is building towards the kind of mathematical proficiency that we're looking for with our students? Another question to think about is, what might we be able to infer about how students could feel in each lesson if we were saying that lesson A was a more procedural learn these steps versus lesson B, explore and discover this on your own? How might students feel after a lesson, and how can we connect that to the 5 equity-based teaching practices? You can either unmute or jot down what you're thinking in the chat.
To me, I was thinking for goal B, like if they understand how to do the lesson, I'm envisioning the word problem or whatever it is, they should be able to show different models to explain their thinking if they really know it. Support what they know by showing them.
Thank you, Josie. And so if a student can demonstrate their thinking in different models or with different representations, how might that make them feel while they are working on this math? I see Sarah says, with goal B, students could feel like creators of knowledge themselves, not receivers from an expert. Ooh, and hear what Solana says with old anxieties around language like LCM. I have the same reaction to that. I remember being a student and being like, what does that mean again? And always thinking like, why does this ever matter for my life? You know, it was just memorize this set of steps and then do it on the test. But what does that mean for me? You know, so I can think about my students and know that I don't want them to have those same feelings that I felt when I was in classes like that. Yeah, explicitly connecting to previous knowledge in goal B, yes. So before we think about what we want students to do, we also want to articulate what we want students to understand, to know, or to even feel differently about by the end of a lesson. This is a big change from what most of us were taught. And when we look closely at how the activities, we can look closely at how the activities within the lesson support students with reaching the learning goal. So that makes me think about what Willie was sharing with, you know, on paper, it can look the same, but now what am I going to do with that to be able to have my students feel differently about math, think differently, understand something differently that might not yet translate into what can they do? So in an IM lesson, there's a lot of support components that work together to internalize the math learning goals that are already there. And I'm not going to explain all of these because most of you have been using this curriculum. But if you have a question about one, please know that there's no question too small, and there's so much expertise in this room. We can definitely support one another to, if there's one of these kinds of supports built into the curriculum that we can elaborate on or help each other to understand or think about in a new way. So there's a lot of rich information packed into the teacher prep materials that you have, and it is the key to understanding the mathematical learning goal. So the pre-work for today's session was about lesson internalization, but also I recognize that on Friday at the end of the slide, it said like, you'll have some time to work on this today during our time together. So if you got to work on that during your async time, great. If not, we're going to take some time right now. So take about a minute to gather your prep materials. So you can think about the unit that you were just working with in your breakout rooms with your grade level peers a few minutes ago. So go ahead and pull up a lesson plan for the first unit that you'll be getting ready to teach. I'll give you a few moments to be able to do that, and let us know if you need any support accessing your materials. And also in Moodle, you have access to the internalization guide. So well, let me see if it logged me out. Hold on, I've got to log myself back in. Maybe, maybe not. So when you come down to session 8 in Moodle, you have the lesson internalization. Oh, it did log me out. So you can click on this and have access to that for support. Kind of takes you through some steps for how you might think about internalizing the lesson. And we are going to take about, let's see, Emily, help me out here. About how many minutes do you think we can have to work on drafting the goals? We had 5. Are we still on track for that?
Let's do like 3.
Okay.
3 to do our best.
Okay. All right. So take about 3 minutes to look through this. You can go off camera if that helps you. And then you will be able to just, look at the materials that are there and remember, how can I write a learning goal that describes cognitive change going beyond just what students will be able to do? So thinking about what will they understand? What will they think differently about? So take about 3 minutes to do that. You will get to go back into your breakout rooms shortly. Take about 30 more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and come back together. I know it feels like we are running a race right now, and just going to acknowledge that that's true. No, that's okay. just want to make sure we're getting kind of a taste for what these steps might be, or how we might be able to collaborate together and support each other together as we go through this process of planning success for all students. So, learning goals, our conversation was really brief, but would love to have some of you vocalize your thoughts here and how learning goals set the stage for equitable and effective instruction, and what we might need to do to internalize the learning goals to bring that instruction to life. And Emily just dropped the question in the chat as well. So I'm seeing some ideas in the chat for what we might need to do to internalize the learning goals. Is anyone willing to come off mute and kind of process it with us, how you see this as setting the stage for equitable and effective instruction? Right, so I'm seeing in the chat, let's see, that they're setting the atmosphere. So if we think back to how with the graphic of how those 8 practices are organized, and the first one is about the learning goals. And so that's really informing all of the rest of the ways that we design and deliver our instruction. Clarity and purpose, like a guiding light, definitely. All right. So if you're still thinking about your learning goal, that's okay, but we are going to really get into the meat now of lesson internalization and preparation. So we're going to have about 10 minutes to get ready to prepare to teach this lesson. You'll have the option of working independently where you are right now, or going into your breakout group with your grade level peers. So you can choose if you join that group or stay right here. So you know, we will be thinking, what is it that I want to say? 2 sessions back to back is a lot, y'all. Okay, so I know that it's true for me, it's true for you as well. What we're going to be doing is spending about the next 10 minutes preparing to teach a lesson, getting ready for it. And then afterwards, we're actually going to have time to try it out and teach to some of our colleagues like they are well-behaved students in our classrooms. So you'll be getting ready to do that, to be able to get some feedback and really dig into the materials together and all of these equitable teaching practices that we've been talking about and effective teaching practices. How are we pulling all of that together now into something that will be real for your students as soon as they enter your classroom? So you might choose to just focus on one part. It might be the warm up or one of the activities in the lesson. You decide what it is that you want to prepare and practice. You can use all of the tools available to you, the internalization guide, thinking about accelerating learning, but you decide what you want to dig into and give a try. And so we will give you about 10 minutes to do that. So Emily will open up the breakout rooms. If there's any questions, let me know. And like Emily said, if you prefer to have independent think time, feel free to stay in this main room. recording? Okay. So over the next little bit of time, you will have the opportunity to rehearse a part of the lesson that you were just working. So I want to take a moment to talk about why this process is so important. Those of you who do all of you teach self-contained classrooms? Do any of you like teach multiple groups of students throughout the day? I see yes, no, maybe so. Especially when you get to talking with like middle school and high school teachers who have multiple blocks of students, they'll often notice that their afternoon classes go way smoother than their first classes. I see some head nodding. Why is that? What's happening there?
Practice.
That we're able to like reflect and make changes based on what went right and what went wrong in the first round of it.
Definitely. Yeah, and I even think about I see in the chat you're getting better at teaching it. Same can be true for like a less compact time. When I think about like multiple years in the same grade level, I know my first year of teaching, I taught first grade, and my second year I got moved to fourth. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I would never want to teach again the way that I taught my first year teaching. And now I have to do it all over again, but like learning new standards and everything. So the more experience that we have with something, the more we're able to reflect and get into it. Definitely. And so this is something that professionals do all the time is they practice. They practice their technique. Pilots continually practice with flight simulators and trainings. Surgeons refine their technique by practicing on cadavers. But what about us? How do teachers practice? We can't practice on our students. We know the stakes are too high. We only have each other. But sometimes it can feel really uncomfortable, or it can be really challenging to practice with colleagues. And I want to give us some space to talk about why that might be. Like, how does practicing and teaching to your colleagues, how does that make you feel? Is it comfortable? Is it stressful? Like, let's take a few minutes to kind of air some of that. You can use the chat. You can come off mute. Yep, I see stressful. And Sammy says, when you have a supportive team, it can be great. So true. The atmosphere created by the people in the room can make all of the difference. Definitely. And we talked a little bit before, and also I'm thinking back to some of the things that were shared in our conversations on Friday with like the challenges of teaching virtually too. Like that's new, and that's been new for all of us. And something that I've seen is that the pandemic has forced us as educators to collaborate more than we ever have before, and to rely on one another more than we ever have before. And so I really want to invite all of us into a space of remembering that like we're on the same team, and that we're in this work together for the students that we serve. And so we can also do that and support one another through serving and being able to just practice together. So while you are having the opportunity to rehearse your lesson, we have this deliberate practice framework that we use. And deliberate practice refers to activities meant to improve teaching that are based in principles derived from research. There's 5 principles that you can see here on the screen. And the first principle that we're really going to be focusing on today is pushing beyond one's comfort zone. So recognizing that it can be super uncomfortable to practice, to practice teaching, but also want to recognize that it's really important as we continue to ground ourselves in equity, and remember, like, we don't want that first draft of how it's going to go when we teach to be directly to our students. But when we can trust and rely on our colleagues to support us through that first draft, we can make sure that the students are really getting our best, like to the highest extent possible. So we want to recognize that deliberate practice can feel uncomfortable. It can feel stressful. You might already have like an elevated heart rate or sweaty palms just in saying like, we're going to do this. Recognize that that's okay. And also just want to you know, like Sammy said, be the supportive team for one another so that we can push beyond our comfort zones and say, like, we're doing this for the kids that we serve. So as we engage in lesson practice, we want to be keeping an eye out for the equity-based teaching practices that we have learned about in our boot camp together. Emily just dropped a link now to a chart with all 5 of those practices and what it looks like and does not look like in a class in a lesson that encompasses equity or what it. So there's the example and the non-example. And Beth, this is what we were talking about after the session ended on Friday. This was the chart that we were looking for and we're saying. So you've got that there. Oh, it says no access to the link. Emily can be on that and we'll get it. Is everyone having that issue? Yes, having the issue, or yes, you're able to access.
Give me a second, y'all. Let me fix this.
Okay, while she's working on that, I'll also show you some where you can find some resources in Moodle. So when I click over to my Moodle and I go down to Module D, Planning for Student Success, and I scroll down to session 8, there's a couple different ways that I can do this. I can click on any of the links and then click the next arrow until I get there, or I can come straight down to where it says materials for virtual session 8. And so here you'll be able to see the slides from today, and then I can go to the next virtual or next materials. Here is just the instructions from that deliberate practice, the prep that we just spent 10 minutes on. Here are the tasks, so you'll be able to have this open and remember kind of what's the protocol that we want to be using. And here's a link also to that document. So this is what it looks like. Now there's an updated link. Does it work for you now? Updated link in the chat. Yes? Yes, awesome. Okay, so you'll have this available for you as you are going through. And you can use this to guide your feedback to your partner. So we'll give you a few minutes to read over the chart and kind of refresh your memory on those equity-based teaching practices. And I can pull it back up here. No, I won't. I'm going to go back to the question so it's not confusing. Okay, so you've got access to the chart. You can keep referring to that. And what are we going to do? So in our breakout rooms, we are going to take turns going through this protocol. These times are suggested just to hopefully give you the opportunity to have more than one of you be able to practice. Let's see. Yeah, so just as soon as you get in, take a moment to determine your roles, who's going to go first, who's going to be the student or the students. Then you'll have a few minutes to engage in that deliberate practice. You can choose to have a facilitator who is observing and looking for those equity-based practices and helping keep the time, share your feedback. Then the person who was the teacher can reflect on that experience, and then you'll switch. Are there any questions about what this is going to look like? My watch is talking to me. Any questions about this?
I'm not sure I understand.
My watch does not understand. I'm going to take it off. Maybe it'll stop trying to listen to my conversation. Okay, so Lana, which lesson? The one that you were just working on. So any lesson, any part of a lesson from one of the first units that you'll be teaching. All right, if there are no other questions, Emily is going to open up our breakout rooms with our practice groups.
Awesome. Well, thank you for engaging in that and being willing to push beyond your comfort zone. So how does planning and practice, how does this process enhance your ability to enact the equity-based teaching practices? You can either drop your ideas in the chat, but would also love to hear your voices off of mute.
What I enjoyed about this particular activity was the opportunity to talk to my colleagues and to see that they struggle with a lot of the same things that I struggle with, and they have different strategies on how to get over certain obstacles. It also gives us an opportunity to, brainstorm. So we might not know the answer, but it gives us an opportunity to brainstorm on how to provide access to students who are not readily engaged for whatever reason it may be.
Yeah, I see that, like getting ideas from others is also showing up in the chat.
Oh, and another thing, it also allows your colleagues to support you in a way where they get an opportunity to see your blind spots that you don't necessarily see. So they get an opportunity to provide input and or help you out in that particular area.
Definitely. And I see what Elizabeth just put in the chat. Just as we want students to learn from one another, we can do the same. Definitely. That's a great modeling though, of what it is that we hope students do. Awesome. So over these last 8 sessions, maybe it doesn't feel like 8 because some of them have gone back to back over the last not even 2 weeks, like a week and some days, I think. There has been a lot of learning going on. So let's take a moment to recap what we have covered in these 8 sessions. So we looked at the 3 instructional shifts and how they're present in our standards. We discussed our illustrative math materials and how the instructional shifts are embedded into them. We began learning about NCTM's effective teaching practices and how they support students in building mathematical proficiency. We deepened our understanding of what it means to be mathematically proficient and recognize that it's more than just solving problems. We know that proficiency won't come for all of our students if we are not considering equity. We saw places where all of these frameworks, the shifts, our curriculum, and NCTM's effective teaching practices will support us in providing equitable instruction, and places where we need to do the heavy work of considering equity. So in session 1, you got started drafting a vision statement. I know that not everyone was here for that, and that's okay. If you worked on it in any of the other sessions, that's great. But if not, we can jump right into it now. So today we dug into our learning goals and preparing to teach lessons effectively and equitably. And after session 5, we had some reflection questions as well. So let's see, it's time for us to now add all of these together into our final visions. So we are going to have about 4 minutes of independent think and writing time for you to be able to just take some notes and add that to your vision statement. If you did it digitally or on paper, you'll want to have that out. If you didn't get a chance to get started, then you can work on your draft now, thinking about everything we have covered through these boot camps and what you want to be true for your students. about 30 more seconds to kind of wrap up your thoughts. All right. So as you continue to think about your visions, some things that you can be thinking about and discuss with your colleagues, what will support you with your vision? How can you support one another to bring those to life? What challenges do you anticipate and how might you address these challenges? We don't have time right now for us to all share our visions with one another, but what we would love for you to do is to upload your vision into our Moodle forum. That way we can see each other's. We can also revisit them in future inquiry cycles as we continue on throughout the year with our collaboration. I know that I am super excited for all of your students and the opportunities that they will experience being in your classrooms and in your schools over this year. And I know that the visions that you are drafting and crafting and continuing to build will really be impactful for them. You can think about, some tips that Emily has shared previously. You could think about printing your vision and putting it in your classroom so that you can see it and reflect on it on a regular basis. Maybe having it on a clipboard that you have as you walk around your classroom. You could put it as the screensaver on your computer, but finding a way to keep it in mind on a regular basis so that all of your best intentions turn into action and impact for your students. So now we would love to hear from you before we close out today and how your thinking has changed over the course of our time together. So maybe you want to think back to that, the first draft of the vision that if you were with us in session 1, what does it look like now compared to when you first started? So take a couple of seconds to think about how's your thinking changed? How will this impact your practice? And then would love for you to share in the chat or come off mute. Yep. Thank you for the reflections. Keep them coming. What you shared, Sarah, reminds me of this idea, like sometimes we can think like I teach 4th grade or I teach math or I teach, these standards, this curricula, but no, really I teach students. And so when they're at the center of what I'm doing, I'm thinking about everything else as a tool to be able to provide opportunities for all of my students. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing those. Mm-hmm. That's great. Hoping all students feel empowered. Time to explore. Lindsay, I'm so glad that this is making you excited to teach with this new material. Mm-hmm. All students' voices. Yeah. Inclusive came up in a couple of times, or a couple of reflections. Solid ideas, strategy shifts. Awesome. I also want students to love math. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so as our time together draws to a close, we would really love to have your feedback to be able to continuously improve our own offerings and make sure that the time that we spend with you is really, if you think back to our first session, is worth the investment that your district makes. It's worth your time. It actually means something for your students that really matters to us. So please take just a few moments to fill out this survey, which is also in Moodle. We would love for you to follow us as Teaching Lab on social media. These are our handles. We have completely revamped our website. We would love for you to, like, share, follow along, keep in touch with us in that way. We like to share out relevant content and shout out our partners as well. And finally, just thank you. Thank you so much for your participation, for the ways that you have engaged in thinking about equitable math instruction for all students. It's been wonderful.
And y'all, you should have received an email, hopefully from Moodle. I have put on Moodle under announcements, the session recording links. And so today's session hopefully will be up there as soon as possible, as soon as we get that link.
So big thanks to Callie and to Emily and to all the many facilitators that we had this week and last week. Thank you for being a part of our work and growing this together. I wanted to share sort of the next steps. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen. Chris, Solana, and I want you to know that we are here for you as you prepare for the school year and really begin this journey. So we wanted to kind of start where we left off and write down any contact info that you need to feel secure going forward. And then some of you are going to be curious and your colleagues are going to be curious about making up any missed portions. And so we want you to know that all those recordings that Emily just talked about, you did get in an e-blast or an email blast. But there's also more details about that on our page. So on the SDEM Elementary Pilot School page, beyond where you were kind of this week, this is the information about making up the summer launch. And so if you or your colleagues go to this page, there's some information there. All the recordings are on Moodle. I went and checked. Awesome. Emily went and put them in. So if you're going directly to a session, say you need to make up session 3, the video recordings are also right there too. Everything is due by September 10th at 11:59 p.m. So if you'd like to make up a session, you have the next few weeks to do so. Chris and I, and maybe Solana, can be here to answer questions too, if you have any more before you go.
Sarah, I have a question for specifically for Baker and Horton staff. So we're in year 2. We're both also literacy focused schools. So our staff was participating in the literacy work earlier. What's today, Monday, last week in the mornings. So I guess my question is I know that for Horton and Baker being your 2 schools, session 6, 7, and 8 were kind of crafted for our sites. We haven't been working with the newer schools that are onboarding this year. So my question is should our staff go and do the sessions 1 through 5? Is it necessary? Do they need to? Are they missing out on things? I just wanted to get a little more clarity around that so that I could communicate that. I also have 6 leave replacement teachers that couldn't attend. So I just need to, I want to give a little bit of clarity as to what it is that that at least my staff should attend.
Okay. So yeah, so Baker and Horton. Yeah, Baker and Horton, you missed session 1, you missed session 2, and you missed the first part of session 3. Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. You all came in at half of session 3 and on. So you've actually received the training if you were here all 3 days for 3.5 to 8. But if you would like to make up 1, 2, and the first part of 3 to receive pay and to have that understanding, you're more than welcome to do that. But it's not essential.
Great.
Or required.
Thank you.
Nothing's required from
Thank
here on
you,
out.
Chris. Thank you for clarifying that. And then one more question about the asynchronous work, because I know we were doing some back and forth between when do we show up on Zoom and not. Teachers, staff will be compensated for the asynchronous work, correct?
So when you get on Nearpod, it had you put in your name. And all throughout the module, it has you contribute and give answers and responses. So that's how we'll know if you completed that work.
Got it. I just wanted to make sure to clarify that in case my timekeeper gets questions or we get questions. So, okay, perfect. So as long as when they log into Moodle or Nearpod, I don't have access to Moodle yet, so I don't know what it looks like. It'll be recorded and the time will be kept in that sense, correct?
I believe, yes, we will work on that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Chris, anything to add that I'm forgetting?
Nope, you said it all. Great job, Sarah. We're here if you need us, so feel free to email or whatever, get a hold of us.
Josie, I saw your hand.
Yeah,
that's
can I ask
awesome.
real quick? I asked Callie, so she said she was gonna find out, but maybe one of you know, is there a pre-assessment that